Hey guys, what's up? Before I start, you're probably going to be hearing some like music and stuff in the background. There's not much I can do about it. Right now, they're celebrating in the back and having fun listening to the songs and stuff like that, and I can't do anything about it. And it's like not as bad as Christmas music, but it's freaking close to Christmas music. I'm getting sick and tired of fuck. Anyway, just get on with it. As you can see, this is going to be a martial arts themed discussion video to give you guys a break from the Dark Souls stuff because I got a couple more coming out. And I haven't forgotten about the one I want to do on, the whole political mess that's going on in the country right now. But I've been doing several takes of that, and I'm not happy with them, and I'm trying to get this just right, considering the seriousness of the topic. So forgive me if that one doesn't come out as quickly as I'd like, but I'm trying to get it out before the end of the year. Can't promise it, but I'm trying. So, anyway, more serious topic than the video game stuff I've been tossing out, but a little more fun, I guess, because it's martial arts. Specifically on misconceptions of the Chinese sword, the Jian, and how these things can happen. One thing I've encountered when, talking with other Chinese martial artists about how the Jian is used, I get different responses depending on the type of practitioner I'm bumping into. Some, are actually, they'll have mild surprise. Like, some people already know. Like, I tend to hang out with a lot of practical-minded martial artists anyway, so they're not really too surprised. There are some who are surprised and like, wow, I didn't really know that. And I'm like, yeah, well, read this or follow this artist or check this out. And they're like, wow, cool, I didn't really know. And then, they take it in stride because they like researching these things, And then you bump into those who get really offended when you point out that a great number, a majority of Chinese martial artists really don't know how to use their weapons. And, it's kind of weird if you stop and, it's not too weird because it's not too hard to understand why they wouldn't know. But it's still kind of weird that they get so offended when you realize how easy it is for their arts to end up being kind of twisted. Think about it. A lot of, whether it's fist arts or weapon arts, but let's stick with the weapon arts. A lot of weapon arts, a lot of weapon forms that they practice aren't even geared toward combat. Like a lot of guys out there practicing contemporary wushu forms, which, as you know, contemporary wushu has next to no combat, practicality to it at all. It's just done for the athleticism's sake and for looking pretty. Excuse the expression. I don't really mean to offend anybody who practices it, but that's it's a performance art. You're not really training to fight somebody when you're training in contemporary wushu. And if you're using the weapons are extremely light and flimsy, and there's almost no combat application taught to you in those forms whatsoever. And a lot of those cross over into the so-called traditional schools. And even if they try to stick with traditional forms, there are a great deal of traditional forms that don't necessarily have combat ability in it anyway. Some of the movements come from traditional dance. Some of them come from folk shamanistic practices, and even the practical forms have a little bit of that shamanistic practice in there, like this. You got things like that in there, and then to make matters worse, again, there are few teachers out there that truly know how to actually use this weapon, like actually use it. They maybe know an application here or there, and they could probably demonstrate it in a okay, let me show you what this is supposed to do. If you do this, and then I do this, like, they could probably do it like there, but if you actually throw them in, like, in the middle of a ring or something, like, throw them in the middle of a gym and throw two sticks at them, like, at each person and go, all right, have at you, they probably wouldn't know what to do. And when you point it out, they get really mad. Like, some people get really, really mad. And you're not trying to offend them, you're just trying to point out, yeah, that's... Like, when you try to say, no, the Jian is not a rapier, damn it. It's a cut and thrust sword. Look at your form. There are cuts in it. Or, it's like, no, the Jian is not supposed to be less than a pound. Or, just things like that. And they get really mad because they think that's the way it's supposed to be used. Or, hell, one time I even heard one person saying that the Jian is not even used to kill your opponent. It's because it's so light. How could you possibly use it? It's the only reason, the way you're supposed to use it, you're supposed to attack their limbs so that they drop their weapon and feel the pain. And while they feel the pain, you run away. I'm not kidding. I've actually heard that. Now, I hear many different counter arguments when I try to say that no, that's not true. And whoever told you that, the reason why they told you, whoever's teaching you this, they don't know how to use the weapon. And one common response I've gotten is that there is no way that these people could possibly have forgotten how to use their swords, because these are arts that have been passed down from generation to generation, just unadulterated. You know, it's a tradition from master to student, and they keep it the same, and they keep the style pure. So how could they possibly have forgotten how to use their weapons? How could a culture just completely have all these myths and misconceptions about a weapon that has been with them for centuries? It's impossible. No, it is possible. And it's not something that's, uniquely Asian. You can see it everywhere. Even Western martial arts has suffered from this. For anybody who's thinking that it is impossible or who might even be going, because I also get kind of like the other end of things where it's like, wow, it's amazing how these guys have no clue how to use their swords. Like, they seem to be the only guys that have no clue. No, it ain't true. You see this in just about any culture that is practicing a martial art that hasn't really been relevant battle-wise for a long period of time. Western martial arts is a good example of that. How many myths and misconceptions are there about rapiers and longswords that other martial artists believe? Remember that book that I had a discussion about a couple of videos back? Remember, the author of that book, who technically, I guess you can call a Western martial artist, that they're practicing Jeet Kune Do. It was developed here in the West, so technically, I know that's a whole can of worms, but whatever. They have modern sensibilities, and they themselves believe that the rapier was evolved from all these other more vulgar swords, and it had a refined technique that was used to poke through the holes in armor. We know that's bullshit. I know a lot of you guys are interested in or practice HEMA or know a lot about Western martial arts, and you know that was not true. I could hear you guys' eyes rolling from here. I know you guys know that's garbage, but you also know that there are a lot of people that believe that. That book was not the first time I ever read that. It's not the first time I've ever encountered that belief that the rapier was used to poke through holes in armor, even though it was never a battlefield weapon. But people believed it. And I've heard this from fencers. I've heard this from SCA people. I've heard this even from people who were interested in getting into HEMA but hadn't, fully been fully educated in their art yet. These things persist. Even among people who try to practice the weapon or use the weapon, they don't know. And of course, these things there would be myths about that weapon, because who uses a rapier in combat anymore? When you don't use something for a long period of time, it's that old adage, if you don't use it, you lose it. It's not just for the individual, it's for the culture too. If a culture is no longer keeping something alive the way it used to be, you're going to forget about how it's properly used. And then that's when the myths come up. That's when the misconceptions come about how this is used. Think about long swords. For a long period of time, even all the way up until now, people still believe that long swords are these big, hulking, brute, heavy weapons that weren't that sharp. Again, I know you guys know that's bullshit. Some of you guys get really mad when you hear people say that. But that belief still persists. Even to the point where some people will go really far to try to validate their biases. I'm sure you guys know all about that one TV show a while back where it was done by that one former Marine sergeant dude. I completely forgot his name, and I feel really bad because the guy, he was great in freaking Full Metal Jacket, but whatever. You know the show I'm talking about. The one where they were comparing the longsword to the katana, and they just showed both being made, and then they were testing it against armor and all this stuff. And it was obvious that the way they were using the longsword, they weren't using it to its full potential, and they didn't even forge it to be as sharp as it could be. And then the katana, obviously it was all refined and everything, and they're chopping through stuff, and they're poking through the holes, and see, this is the better sword. Meanwhile, all the guys who actually knew something about the longsword are going, oh my god. Hell, just to throw a Star Wars thing out there. Remember that Lucas originally wanted the lightsaber battles he was adamant at least in the first Star Wars, that the lightsabers had to be used in two hands because the lightsabers were supposed to be very powerful when they clashed and you had to hold on to it. But he also described it as, you know, in the medieval knights, those swords were very heavy. So they had to keep both hands on it. You can't, you know, you can't use them because they're these big, hulking, heavy weapons. It's like, no, they weren't. Long swords, yes, they were long, and yes, they were designed for two hands, but they were not heavy, brute weapons. And they certainly were capable of cutting. But I'm preaching to the choir. You guys already know that. But this is just to prove my point that even in Western martial arts, where we hear all these stories about, we got all these accounts and all these war stories about the knights and their weaponry and what they did with them, well documented. We got treatises that and manuals that HEMA guys are studying, so they know how it's properly used, and yet popular culture still has these misconceptions about how to use a rapier and what a rapier is about and how to use, like, there's a lot of people who still get fencing and rapier fighting confused. They think that, oh, fencing is rapier fighting is a sport. No, it's not. No, it's not. Fencing is actually a representation of small sword fighting, not rapier fighting. When you're using the foil, that's supposed to be a representation of the small sword, the court sword, not the rapier. Sorry. There's a lot of rapier stances and techniques that are nowhere to be seen in fencing. Sorry. Even reenactors sometimes get rapier fighting wrong. SCA basically has a rule about draw cutting with the rapier, where, you know, you'll hit and then you'll draw and it's supposed to be a cut. Rapiers are not cutting swords. Sure, you could do a draw cut with it, but it's not going to be so disabling a blow or disabling a cut that the guy's not going to be able to fight anymore. You're not going to be able to, like, necessarily, like, slice a vein with it. I mean, unless you happen to get really freaking lucky and you really sharpen that edge, which they usually weren't sharpened to that type of degree. But you got that misconception. That's in the rules when they're doing their fighting. So these misconceptions persist even among people who use these weapons and train, at least in the training versions of them in some way. So if these freaking things can happen in Western martial arts, why then is it a surprise that it would happen in the Eastern ones? Especially when you consider all the stuff they weigh down with when it comes to tradition and superstitions and myths and all these other things that kind of like have nothing to do with fighting but are a part of the art. And then when you also add in the fact that because we don't no longer use these weapons and we've even modified them to make it easier for us to practice with, these modern representations are sometimes seen as, oh, this was how the old swords were like, so this is how they were using them, just like I was using them. No, not true. To give a good example, real quick, I know this video is getting long, but this is something that just, it's a bugaboo of mine. It's a bugbear of mine. Gets on my nerves. You know, this one's my baby. This is my main sword, my Hanzen, right here, right? Let's take a quick look at it. Besides the fact that, you know, this is a modern representation. It's not a perfect representation, but it's close, good, high carbon steel blade like it would have been back then. You got the round handle, which I know is not ideal, but I know how to use, whatever. We don't need to get into that. And you got the small handguard, and you got, the main thing I want you guys to notice is the blade itself. Notice how wide it is, okay? I mean, this is like, the blade at the fork is just a little less wide than two of my thumbs put together. Like, if we can just go with that there, you can see that. There we go. See? Like right there. Like, it's like if I put them together, you could just hide them behind. But it's pretty wide. See? And when you get to the tip, even though there's like a rapid taper coming from here to there, I mean, you get a gradual taper and then all of a sudden it rapidly tapers. But even up to this point, that point still has a very sharp edge. And it's still substantive enough so that I can deliver a pretty good cut. This is obviously a sword that can cut as well as thrust, right? Right. No argument, right? And you guys, besides, you've seen me cut things with this, so you know it can do that. Now, let's look at another modern, more contemporary den, which is primarily used for practice. This one was made for training purposes. Now, I happen to like this one. I like the way the handguard was designed so that you got feedback when you're swinging with it. I like the way the blade is designed in a sense so that, when you hear certain that whooshing sound. There's a certain whooshing sound you're supposed to hear when you're cutting correctly with it, when you're going through your forms. I like the shape of the handguard, all that type of stuff. It was made specifically for the person training. But notice the blade as compared to the last one. Look at this. That last one was just a little bit smaller than two of my thumbs put together. And this one, sheesh, is just as wide as one thumb at the fort. At the freaking fort. Then when you get to the tip, look at that. See that? So somebody practicing with this, you can easily see how sometimes, and plus this is dull, right? So somebody practicing with this, I can easily see how somebody training with it would be going, yeah, this sword's used like a rapier. It's only used for thrusting. It's not used for cutting. You just thrust with this. There's no cuts with Jian fighting, even though there's cuts in your form. But forget all that. There's tons of stabbing with this. Because this is not exactly... It's a good training tool, sure, but as a good representation of what Jian were like back then? No. But we got all types of modern bunk that's being put out, which are giving people the wrong idea of how their weapons were. I mean, contemporary wushu weapons, forget about it. Those things don't even count as weapons, much less training weapons. The blades are just like freaking, aluminum foil. Like, there's no weight to them. There's no, for a weapon that you're supposed to thrust with, even those guys, it's only for thrusting. Well, a thrusting weapon should be stiff, right? It shouldn't start bending if I just blow on it. But there you go. Or another thing that a lot of Chinese martial artists who practice with Jian would know a lot about. I'm sure you've encountered this. Remember those swords where it's from here to here is very dull. From here to here, it's kind of sharp. And then from here to here, it's a bit sharper. Or if you're lucky, razor sharp. There are a lot of people like, oh yeah, that's the way Jian were made back then. Because you're supposed to only cut with this. And then you can do some other like more draw cuts or sliding blocks with this. And then just heavy blocking with this. That's the way they made it so you can use it that way. Not really. It was made that way so that the student could understand how to properly use his blade like a fine instrument. But actual combat Jian, sharp all the way down to the fort, unless they made the fort particularly thick. There are some Jian that are made so that the first third is just, really, really thick, but the rest of the blade, sharp all the way through. And then if that was like a particular style, many other Jian was just sharp all the way from here to here. Again, you see my Han Jian over here. Sharp all the way down. But because of these modern tools that people are using, and these modern explanations for why these modern tools are made the way they are, they start thinking that, well, that's the way it was used in ancient times. No. So, you take these things into account, you start thinking about it in context, it becomes easy to see how a modern day martial artist could have all these misconceptions about a weapon that they may have been practicing with for years. But if they didn't actually look into the history of their weapon, they would never know. I mean, there's people who've been practicing for, years. And they still don't really know how this weapon's properly used. Like much less how to actually defend themselves with it, the way it was done. It is a sad state of affairs. But if it makes people feel any better, they're not alone. Same thing's happening with Western martial arts. One could even argue that in some cases, it's happened with Japanese martial arts. Like there are a lot of people who think that Kendo is the same as Kenjutsu. It's not. Sorry, but it's not. These things happen. We're modern day practitioners trying to get back to the source of an art that is no longer practiced the way it used to be. These misconceptions can happen. It's not something that you have to get offended about. It's just something that you're going to have to come to grips with. If you really care about learning the actual art, then you're going to have to put in some legwork. You're going to have to try to find somebody, or at least find some media from the few individuals left that actually still know how to use this freaking thing. or whatever freaking thing you're trying to learn how to use. And you're gonna have to be willing to humble yourself to forget what you may, think about the weapon. I'll leave you with this because this has already gone on long enough. I'm sorry, it was 20 minutes of me just blah, 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 blah. Sorry. But realize that if you're training with a weapon is a tool. Tools are used a particular way. A hammer is used to hammer things. It is not used to screw things. So if somebody basically is telling you that, oh, the reason why the hook part is there in the hammer is so that you can hook it into the screw to turn it around to spin it, obviously that's nonsense. Use your common sense. You know that this is a freaking hammer. Use it to hammer nails or whatever the hell else. That's what the tool is for. This is a cut and thrust weapon. If somebody basically tells you that a blade that looks like this should only be used to poke with and not cut with, or it's only used just to chop at their hands so that they're screaming pain while you run away, does that really look like it's something that this tool was made for? Common sense. We need to use a little bit of it. I know it's really tough trying to research stuff that we no longer use in the way it was meant to be used. And I know it's really hard when there's only a few individuals, I'm not saying I'm one of them, there's only a few individuals that truly have mastered this weapon. They know how this freaking thing is used, and if you try to mess with them, they will destroy you with it before you even have a chance to go forward. I know it isn't easy, but since it isn't easy, we're all going to have to try to chip in, if we're really interested in this, to try to figure out how to get these arts as close to the way they used to be. I mean, that's the interest a lot of us have. So, don't be surprised, since we're modern practitioners trying to study something from long ago, that we're going to get a few things wrong. And don't get offended, if it turns out that the way that you're doing it isn't necessarily the way it was done. It's bound to happen that way. These arts have been lost and found and re-lost and refound over and over and over again. Not just the weapon arts, but even the fist ones. And there's been many reconstructions that have happened throughout human history in so many different martial arts. Definitely in Chinese ones. Realize that. Try to find the valuable stuff and build from there. And, and don't think, just to go back to my original thing, because I'm rambling off of it, to go back to my original stuff, don't be surprised that, Chinese martial arts have modern day misconceptions woven into it. It's not the only one, and it should not be all that surprising. So, that's it. So I just went on for so long, and in case you guys don't see me make another video of mine before the, year ends, have a Happy New Year. And I'll catch you guys later.